What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Lumix Live. Let me just double... Okay, yeah, my audio is working. Cool, yeah, so welcome to another Lumix Live. It's a little bit of a different stream than what we've been doing for the last couple of weeks. Obviously, we've been very laser-focused on the S5 Mark II, but we wanted to, kind of take some time and just kind of open up to general questions across the board. Knowing that probably the vast majority of them, knowing basically a lot of you that tune in every week are primarily looking at the S5 Mark II recently, but yeah, just wanted to open this up to some general Q&A, general questions that y'all can ask us. And I have a couple of things that that I want to do that I do want to show. Because they were questions that have come in through email, through private messaging, like all that kind of stuff. So I've got a couple things to take a look at. But really, this week's broadcast is completely around all the questions that you have. I'm going to try to answer as many of them as I can and get to the ones that I can answer. So if I don't get to your question during the stream, don't worry. It does mean that we are going to still be reviewing all of these because the chat gets saved. So we can go through and try to come up with like better answers or go through some like a dedicated stream on a bulk of them. So yeah, just getting that out of the way early on. If you are new to these broadcasts, these are the weekly streams that we do every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. They're a mix of either Q&A sessions like this, where it's just an open forum to ask us questions, troubleshoot things, check out different things on the cameras. I've got a mix of them here, so we can go through menus if we need to. Or, we'll have guests on every once in a while and do some interviews with creators. Ultimately, the goal of this platform is to provide all of you access to be able to talk directly to Panasonic and not have to necessarily rely on commentary and things that are said in the forums, which often tend to be not accurate, to be fully transparent with you. A lot of things, if you're asking a question on the forum, you're getting opinion, you're not getting fact. Unless it comes from somebody from Panasonic, which I know I'm in some of those groups, and I try to get through as many of them, but this is a platform where you know that you're able to talk directly to us and get the exact answer or a correct answer, and if we don't know it, or it's not something I'm prepared to like have the information for you, I'm able to at least do the research and try to get back to you in following streams. So before we kind of dive into this stuff, I want to remind everybody about Lumix Pro Services. We have LPS here in the US and in many other countries as well. In the US, we have the red tier and a platinum tier. The red tier is free. If you've purchased a Lumix camera, make sure to follow the QR code, and you're in the US at least. Follow the QR code, go to the website, get yourself registered on the red. At least it's free. It just comes with the purchase of the camera. And that's where you would go through if you have any trouble with your camera or any kind of issues that you would need to address with service. If you're someone who likes a higher level of service, we do have the platinum tier. That gets you a number of added benefits over the red tier. You get 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways. You get 20% off out of warranty repairs. So if something's dropped, broken, something that wouldn't be covered under warranty, you get a discount on that as well. Same with sensor cleanings, EVF cleanings, lens checkups, all that kind of stuff. You also get a member hotline, so if you're someone who prefers to speak to people instead of through chat or email, you do have access to the member hotline. And you do also get a pretty cool little welcome gift, which is, I think we're still doing the Peak Design custom strap for adding into the program. So, outside of that, I think we're pretty good to kind of jump into this. I want to remind you, if you have a question for the stream, as you can see what most people are doing, tag at Lumix Cameras somewhere in your question. It just makes it easier for me to see them on my end, so that we can kind of go through them. So with that, let's jump back up to the top of the questions that have come in here and take a look. Al says, early user experiences seem to show the image processing in the S5 Mark II is at least different to, if not slightly worse than, the early S cameras. Any chance of changing this via firmware? And then goes on to kind of dive into that. So one of the first things that I'm going to say is that, for one, I can tell you that the number of times that I've been contacted about, hey, why is this different compared to the original S5, are very small. It seems to be, for some users and some very unique use cases, there seems to be some little bit of a difference. However, when there is new technology deployed, there are always going to be little changes that happen from previous generations. As most of you, if not all of you, remember, for the longest time, we have always held the ground that adding PDAF to a sensor can cause negative image quality impacts, especially with how hard we push the dynamic range of the image processing with our codecs. So some of this may be a byproduct of that. If you're noticing some little differences there, because now you have to add in a layer of masking pixels out to be able to still have an image that doesn't have a whole bunch of like non-information pixels. That being said, that does not mean that things will ever stay exactly the way they are right now. The camera is still an incredibly high-performing camera. If you're looking at any of the tests that you see out there, the camera performs right on par with almost every other camera that's in this category. So we are able to do that while still maintaining a lot of our typical capabilities that we've been doing in these cameras. And it's in the if I assume you're referencing some of the testing that was done recently, they're in the areas where you would never be shooting in. These are areas that, like, no matter what, you would not be shooting in those kind of scenarios, pulling shadows up as hard as you possibly could in that case. There is just no kind of real world use in a certain case like that. So, but does that mean that things are going to stay the same? Of course not. We are always evaluating the image quality. We're always evaluating the feedback that all of you give to better the products as we move forward. And if you've been around with the Lumix line long enough, you know that we are not afraid to push firmware updates to improve things. So at this point, I'd say just kind of sit tight. There are some use cases where users are saying that, like, hey, for them, maybe the PDAF edition is not really worth it because they would prefer to have, ultra clean shadows and some of that kind of stuff. However, all of that being said, it needs to be put in context that what some people are saying, these are the so far extremes that you will barely, if ever, see these kinds of things in the real world. All cameras have some sort of challenge in different scenarios. Our products, we believe, are the best mix of what you can get and the maximum range you can get across the board. And improvements will always come. We are a company that firmly believes in we will improve our products as we go through, especially now that we get more and more feedback from all of you through platforms like Lumix Live. Your feedback is what helps us tweak, improve, kind of maybe reorganize certain things because, the use cases change from when originally things get designed to when they're actually being deployed in the field. So, definitely just keep providing that kind of feedback to us. And then that follow-up about 2.5K, 1440p, 60p, things like that. I don't have an update on any of those. They have been brought up. It's a matter of, a lot of things have to go into determining whether or not a frame rate and resolution combination, one, is possible. What are the downsides of doing it? What happens with imaging processing because of, you have to take that in consideration. And then also ultimately, what does the image quality look like out of something like that? So, a lot of that stuff is being looked at. Sometimes it comes down to hardware limitations as far as whether or not the hardware being used can actually do some of the things that you're looking for. But yeah, we constantly always look and we take your feedback that you provide in the chat to heart to better our products. Where am I going wrong? In photo mode, I can't get my viewfinder and display settings darker or brighter when I'm changing shutter speed, aperture, or ISO. This is one of the things that actually I had kind of prepped a little bit for this to show. So we're going to take a look at this is my S5 Mark II hooked up. If you are someone who likes to have the camera show you a representation of what your exposure is going to do, there's a couple things that you would do with this in particular. First, you're going to go to the custom settings menu. So it'll be the gear. It'll be under custom. And then here, you're going to look for constant preview. What constant preview does on the S5 Mark II is it's designed to give you a representation of the overall exposure. Now, on this camera, you have a couple of different options. So one, you have the ability to have this on and off when you're doing manual focus, since you can do punch-in focus, things like that. But you also have three separate options here. And constant preview is what's going to work when you're in aperture or manual mode to tell you, well, how should the system be demonstrating the image, the preview of this. You can either have it where you have aperture and shutter speed are being displayed to you. And when you do aperture and shutter speed, something to keep in mind with this is that if you go down to like a 1 second exposure, as you go slower in shutter speed, the display is going to refresh at that shutter speed. So if you've got a 1 second exposure, that means that with constant preview, you are legitimately looking at what the image is going to look like, blur and all. But what we added also is the ability that when you're in aperture or manual mode to only let it use aperture for the exposure preview. And this can be really helpful if you're someone who likes to preview what your depth of field is going to look like. So you have that as an option here. But yeah, you would enable and disable that here in constant preview. Otherwise, what the camera will do is it will always try to basically give you a good-looking preview image, more for framing. And that's kind of what a lot of mirrorless cameras will do, unless you go into like an exposure simulation style mode. And this is typically the way that a lot of people will work. I know looking at exposure on the camera is something that a lot of us want to kind of get a rough idea of. But the reality is that if you're looking at ultra critical exposure on a camera, the on-camera monitor is actually going to be very deceiving for you. That's where you want to use things like histogram, waveform. You want to use all the tools that you have at your disposal to actually judge the exposure, because you're limited in what the display will give you. If you've got things like auto brightness on for the rear monitor, your image technically is properly exposed, but it may look dim on the display because the display darkens down if you've got auto exposure and you're in, kind of low light scenarios. So play around with some of those. Another thing, if you want to try to use your display as much as you can for judging exposure, even though, again, as I say, I do not recommend using, and this is for any camera, I don't care who makes it, don't use your on-camera display for judging an exposure. You want to use that more, like, use the tools that you have. Use your meters, use stuff like that. The other thing that you can do to kind of like help with some of this stuff is monitor backlight. This will change. This by default comes out as auto, but you have 6 levels, technically 7 levels, that you can set this to so that your monitor stays the same brightness. So as you get used to it, you'll know like, okay, hey, if I'm looking at this, this is roughly how bright I want that image to be, but I want to bring it into Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever. And you'll be able to know like, okay, this is what it looks like when it's right on the camera. This is to get the exposure and the look that I want on the computer. A little bit of a different way of working. You can still do it with a constant preview, things like that. But if you have constant preview on, you want to make sure things like live view boost are turned off, or night mode, all those kinds of things, because they basically are designed to do kind of the opposite of each other. Let's see here. Question related to the S5 capture modes. When switching from manual to aperture priority, do the settings, all settings, from manual mode carry over to aperture mode? And then I think there's a follow-up there. Or are the settings completely independent, like when you switch from manual mode to video mode? So if you are in PAS or M, so program, aperture, shutter, or manual, all of your settings will be the same across all of those modes. The way if you're someone who wants to set it up that when I'm in aperture, I have these particular settings, or when I'm in manual, I have these particular settings, that's where you would use your C1 through C10 options on the camera. But otherwise, in the actual labeled PAS and M modes, that's just going to be the same across the board. Same white balance, same focus mode, all those options that you select, they will be the same across all of those. Create a video combined set in the camera, which is the other option that you have. What that will do is only change the settings between create a video mode and the PAS or M options there. So a little bit of a difference between manual video to photo, but photo modes will all stay the same. Let's see here. There have been many YouTube videos posted for setting up the S5 Mark II for video, but not many setting up for still photo. Any suggestions? Is a really good question, John. So well, question and observation. Obviously, as Panasonic, we are known very heavily in the video community. It's just kind of what we've built on for years. We have a strong reputation there. People know our products. They know that we provide a lot of tools and features that you don't get everywhere else. When it comes to the photography side, there is a big uptick in photographer adaptation of our products, or adoption. That's the right word. And when it comes to looking for people to do setups on the cameras, I would be looking at channels like The Slanted Lens. They've done a number of comparisons with the S5 Mark II compared to some others. And, you know, the more traditional platforms like DP Review and some of those. When it comes to YouTube videos, I think because the market is so driven towards video these days, and across the board, you really can't buy a bad stills camera. That's why you maybe not seeing as many of those videos. However, on this channel, I primarily am a photographer that happens to also have to know a lot about video. So I am happy to do some of those videos or kind of give some guidance there. So what I would basically suggest for you, John, is there certain types of photography you like to capture? And we can work on actually making, you know, basically a setup guide. You know, hey, this is, you know, what I would recommend for this type of shooting, because it's going to vary so differently. As someone who loves street photography, astro, and landscape, my needs are going to be very different. My setup is going to be very different than someone who does, you know, professional portraiture or product photography. But the camera has all the tools that you would ever need, and honestly, we are the only full-frame camera that offers a lot of features for photographers that you just don't find in other cameras. Like, we have high-resolution shot mode that's built into the camera. The S5 Mark II is going to be getting the live view composite functionality that we have in the S5. No other camera offers those. So one thing I would caution is you see a lot of people out there saying, like, oh, the S5 Mark II is maybe not the best stills camera out there. Read why they're saying some of that. You know, a lot of times these are very one-sided conversations because we've never really kind of talked about photography as a brand. In a lot of cases, we are far exceeding every other camera brand when it comes to stills photography capture with this. But yeah, again, as far as the setup stuff goes, let me know in the chat and we can probably talk about some of that today, actually. Will we be seeing a Vericam BS1H or EVA 1 replacement now that PDAF has been introduced on the Lumix lineup? Unfortunately, we don't talk about future product planning or anything like that, so I wouldn't really be able to kind of give you a clear answer on that. What I can say is that just know that the launch of the S5 Mark II is a new phase for us. You know, we obviously joke with the terminology using phase for two ways. But this is a new step for us. This is a new chapter for the brand. And the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX are just the beginning of that. So, you know, kind of keep following us. You know, keep your ear to the ground with platforms like this, like Lumix Live, our social networks, all those other platforms that we're on. And yeah, you'll be able to hear updates when we have them. Leaf says, on the GH5 and GH5 Mark II, does linear focus transition work when connected and recording using an external monitor? Yes, it does. And even on the S5 Mark II, focus transition 100% works when you have it attached to an external monitor. The only caveat with focus transition is there are some lenses from other L-mount partners and other Micro Four Thirds partners that may not work. And a lot of it just comes down to typically just age of the lens and whether or not it's communicating enough information for it to be able to go back and forth. But I think I don't know if I've ever actually run into a lens that doesn't support it, so that shows you how few. Like, I mean, we're talking of the hundreds of lenses that are available for Micro Four Thirds and L-mount. You know, you're talking probably less than 10 would ever, maybe not even have that capability. So it's a pretty small number that would have that. Alan says, wondering how to get FN buttons and dial settings on my GH5 Mark II in photo modes, usually A, but sometimes M, to stick. What's the best way to save these settings for these modes? I guess I'm not following, Alan. Is it that when you... what would you mean to get them to stick? Because when you program them and you're in the photo mode or the recording mode, they should just stay. If it's not staying, definitely let me know, because I would be very curious to double check and kind of go through and see what's going on with your setup. For the S5, when photographing, which metering mode adjusts the exposure using aperture priority to the subject in the continuous autofocus box? Does that meter exist in the S5? Adjusts the exposure using aperture priority to the subject in the continuous... Oh, okay. So you mean, like, linked metering. If I remember right... let me go to my camera. So as far as metering goes, we have 4 metering options in the S5, or the GH5 Mark II and newer, especially in the S5 and S5 Mark II. You have the multi-metering, which is a full area, so that's going to use the full image area to give you, to make white, basically make middle gray. Then you have center-weighted, spot, and then highlight spot metering. One of the things that we also offer in the camera, and I have to see if I can do it while I have it attached to the HDMI. Actually, I'm not going to be able to do it over HDMI. So one of the other things that we do have is the ability that if you have touch tab enabled, you have the ability to link your metering, your spot metering mode to the AF point. Now this is for one area, it's typically one area. It's not going to do where it's like you're tracking the subject and moving around. That isn't something that we do have in the cameras, but it is something that we can bring up to the engineers to say, hey, is this something that we think we could do down the line? I don't think that'd be something hard, in the sense that, like, the logic is there to kind of do it. It's a matter of whether or not you'd actually get a good user experience out of it, because if a subject's moving a lot through dark and bright and things like that, your screen and your exposure is going to be massively shifting all over the place. So you'd kind of have to... There always has to be balance to see whether or not, as good of an idea as it sounds, whether or not it's something that actually in practice would make sense. So, but we will definitely pass that on, Ruckus. I'm having a bug switching between photo and video where photos get stuck at 3200 ISO max in auto ISO with a max at 12,800 on the GH6. Photo and video where photos get stuck at 3200 max in auto ISO with max at 12,000. Rhett, I would say I would just double check and make sure, because you can set independent max ranges for photo and video. Just double check and make sure that in the photo ISO max range that it's identical to what you're in video. It shouldn't be changing it that way. But yeah, just double check on that and let me know in the chat, and we'll try to see if we can troubleshoot. I have my GH6 here too. So, Warren, I'm using my S5 to scan film at the moment, but I can't figure out how to set a ISO to 100. I can't get below 400. I've checked YouTube and Google, but haven't found the answer. Help. That would be because you're most likely using Vlog for your color profile, or one of the other color profiles. If you are using a logarithmic profile, your ISO minimum is going to be set 640 and 4000. You could be using, I have to remember which one is which. I think the Cinelike profiles might be 200 or 400. Basically, set your camera to standard color profile and then go into your ISO and you should be able to go down to 100. The other thing to check is make sure that, well, since you're on an S5, you don't have manual selection between high and low range. But if you happen to use a little information for everybody else, if you're using a camera like an S1 or the S5 Mark II that has the selection for high and low ISO, you want to make sure that you're in like low or standard. But the fact that you're seeing that you're stuck at 400 and you can't go below tells me that you're in a color profile that is limiting that range. Go to standard for that, because if you're shooting it in RAW, you do not want to be photographing in Vlog anyway. There is absolutely no benefit to doing it from a photography perspective, even if you're shooting in RAW, because your ISO levels are different, your exposure mapping is different. And there's zero reason to compress the dynamic range when it comes to RAW photos, because there is inherently more dynamic range in standard than there is in Vlog. Let's see here. How close is the look of Pana Leica lenses for MFT to Leica lenses? That's a pretty good question. So one of the things that kind of sets our top tier list of lenses apart from the rest of the line is look. Anything that carries the Leica branding, whether it is the Panasonic lenses that are actually branded and state Leica on them, or if it's in the S series or the L mount and it says certified by Leica, those are lenses that from an image quality perspective, from things like color, micro contrast, down to lens coatings, things like that, and even down to design, they are designed based on Leica standards. So you're going to get pretty close to it. Are they going to be an exact match to the Leica lenses? Not necessarily, because you have different optic formulas, stuff like that also come into play. But anything that's in the Panasonic Leica branding or certified by Leica on the S series are going to get you very close to the Leica look in that platform, because they are basically designed together and under Leica's kind of design approval to get that naming. Let's see here. EH, I noticed recently that for anamorphic recording on the GH6, there are no 422 options for 4x3, only 420. Will this option be added in a future firmware update? Probably not. One of the things to remember, sorry that I'm having to adjust around a lot. I have an issue with my back. One of the things to kind of remember is that 422 10-bit, in order for ease of editing across the board and work, typically has to be in an H.264 compression. So you're looking at, relatively large file sizes. That's typically where you start looking into really the benefits really come when you're in like all intra options, things like that. When it comes to recording in open gate on our cameras, specifically on like the GH6, things like that, the reason it's 420 is because it's an HEVC compression. So you're getting basically double the data rate that you get in H.264, but you're also within a chroma subsampling that is easily decoded by editing software and hardware. If you were to do H.265 to keep the file sizes down, but then go to 422 chroma subsampling, you'd end up actually more often than not having to transcode your footage in post to do anything with it. Caveat being, there are some laptops and some computers that can support it. That's not the mass case across the board. In reality, the difference between H.265 in 420 and H.264 in 422 is so minor that, one, unless you are doing very heavy keying, you will probably never notice the difference between the two. And in that case, it's where you look at, you're going to a very edit-friendly and workflow-friendly format, as opposed to going to something that's just going to cause you a headache down the line. The other side effect there, too, is that 422 10-bit versus 420 is a lot harder to process, so the processor, the thermal management, thermal load that gets put on by doing 422 is higher. So in some cases, there are just decisions that are made that, look, you just can't do it in that particular mode and be able to maintain reliability, so it doesn't do it. Part of the kind of whole overall setup there. But that is why when you look at our 420 options, they're HEVC. They're designed to be workflow friendly while still giving you the maximum quality that you can get out of that setup. Leafcatcher, is there a possibility for a future update to add menu options in the S5 Mark II to toggle the IBIS to a weaker behavior to avoid warping in the corners? This is something that we've asked and brought up to the image stabilization engineering team. I think one of the things that kind of gets passed around the internet, that is why I was saying before that if you look on the Facebook groups or Instagram groups or Reddit and things like that, you get a lot of people that have opinions, but no one actually has an answer, because anyone that works on these things is not going to be telling you in a forum, hey, this is what works and this is what can be done. That's just not how it works. which means that a lot of times people oversimplify what a fix would be. Just because of saying that, like, you can make it weaker to avoid corner warping does not necessarily mean that that's actually what a fix would be for it. All of that being said, it has been brought up that, hey, is there a way to make anything wider than 20 millimeter have less corner warping? Because now you're going into those, like, ultra wide angle areas where stabilization, one, this is why we don't put stabilization in lenses under certain focal lengths, because one, they don't actually really give you anything. And if anything, you have a potential image quality hit because you now have a moving element as opposed to a, fixed stack of elements. But it's something that it sounds easier to kind of figure out than it is. But know that there are people that have studied and their sole purpose is working on things like stabilization and fixing those problems. They're way more educated than any of us are on this. So they take the feedback, they listen, and they look at what all of the market and users show to see if there are things that, okay, hey, now that we know that this is being used this way, is there a way that we can maybe modify it? So I can't say that we're going to do it or if it's even possible, but that feedback is up there and it has gotten to them. So yeah. Eduardo, is it possible to add the Preburst feature to the S5 Mark II? We are definitely asking and pushing for that. Matt Fraser and I definitely are big advocates. We want to have Preburst back in the camera. However, a lot of us, like myself, I would much rather have Preburst that's in the ability to be able to capture raw photos. Now, like with the S5 Mark II, since we have the ability to do 30 frames per second with raw capture, it is something that we've pushed back on to say, hey, look, we get that 4K photo and 6K photo, the reason we removed them is because truthfully in the market, we did not see many people using those features. So if it meant we can, kind of pull those out and put some other cool stuff in there, that's a decision that gets made. But knowing that a lot of people are asking about a pre-capture is the part that they missed from 4K, 6K photo, we are looking into it. No idea on a timeline, things like that, but it is something that we're looking into. Eastern Horizon Studios. I think I can see your question. What's the good entry-level video camera between a GH5, GH5 Mark II, or a GH5S? Hands down, GH5 Mark II. The GH5, it's a great camera. It's still an amazing camera. If you ask a lot of people that have been shooting with them, it's still a workhorse. You really can't go wrong with the GH5. However, I am an advocate for, one, buying the newest one that you can afford. So if looking between the two of them, one, knowing that GH5 Mark II came out at a lower launch MSRP than the original GH5, the Mark II is going to have more longevity as far as things like firmware, support, stuff like that. The GH5 is effectively end of its firmware support for any kind of new features. That's why we have the S5 or the GH5 Mark II. I'll eventually get all these names right. But what I would not recommend if you're looking for entry level is a GH5S. The GH5S, it's an amazing camera and it is beyond capable for anything that you'd want to throw at it for the most part. But it will require you to have things like a gimbal or components like that if you're looking to use it as handheld. It's also last generation hardware. So when you go to the GH5 Mark II, you're on newer gen hardware. More up-to-date algorithms that have been programmed into that because the processor that's used in that camera is newer. So it will get you a little bit better overall longevity and performance on a GH5 Mark II. That being said, if price is a concern for you in an entry level, you could always take a look at a GH5. Like I said, it's not a bad camera at all. You can usually get them for some pretty good deals. So looking at that, all right, Eastern. You're kind of losing it here with all the chat drops there because I only just saw them. Just as a heads up, if you spam the same question more than twice, I will put your account in timeout on the channel. I unfortunately have no kind of really have no patience for that, because it makes it harder for others to be able to go through and see things. So hopefully I addressed your question. If budget's something, GH5. Budget's not an issue, GH5 Mark II. GH5S I'd probably steer clear of for an entry-level user when you can get a GH5 Mark II for less money. Mike, so when will the S-Series support Bluetooth support on the RS3? I bought it because it was supposed to connect with Bluetooth. So for one, we've never said that we would support Bluetooth on the RS3. Bluetooth support is not something that we, as a brand, have ever stated. If you're looking for that, I can tell you unequivocally right now, we don't do it. I don't know if there are plans to support it. I don't even know if it's possible to support it. If DJI is saying they can do it, that's a different story. But we don't ever state that we can do Bluetooth support for camera control on those gimbals. You do have to use the USB cable for compatibility. Let's see here. FC, I detect spam. Yes, I just saw that. Let's see here. Let me double check, make sure I'm not continuing to do that. Okay, there we go. All right, where were we? Any plans for an S5 Mark II with an optical low-pass filter? Probably not. Hybrid mirrorless cameras, typically an optical low-pass filter, as much as cinematography and higher-end video users have big benefit for them. The vast majority of people buying cameras these days prefer the sharper-looking image out of a camera. Not saying that that's correct or wrong or whatever, it's just a fact. But, you know, there's reasons why cameras like our S1H have a low-pass filter, because we know that that camera is designed more for that market. The S5 Mark II and S5 Mark II X are designed for hybrid creators, for the people that are going to be jumping back and forth between all of these different kinds of areas. We will never put out the idea of never including an optical low-pass filter. Just know that it's rare that you're going to see one be included in a number of cameras. Even if you look at other brands, they're just not as common these days anymore because things have kind of changed a little bit. But, you know, keep letting us know. If those are things that are make or break for you in a camera, you got to let us know. And let us know in platforms like this. Don't let us know over on Facebook, because we're probably rarely ever actually going to be able to see all the stuff over there. It's most of those groups are private, so our team can't actually see them. And when we do see them, it takes, you know, for every one request, it could take 20 minutes to transpose that request into something that can be seen by the rest of our team. So always let us know on this platform. Andy, I have to say, I've been using my GH6 for birding and noticed that it's been missing focus a lot. The bird detection misses a lot, so I use one area, but it still misses. Firmware is up to date. But this is an issue that I didn't have with. Will there be an update for the rest of the non-Leica lenses with the autofocus? It's slow and misses on the GH6. I'm not sure if I'm missing part of your question. I'd have to dig a little bit further into that one, Andy, to kind of see as far as, one, like what lens are you using, what firmware update is the lens on. I see, obviously, you say the camera's up to date, but I kind of have to know what lens you're looking at to try to be able to get you maybe a little bit more info on that one. Shouldn't really be seeing that big of a problem with it. One of the things to remember with the photography side of the cameras, and I can show you on the S5 Mark II, is that in the photography side, one of the most overlooked things that we have in our cameras is this option here called AF Custom Settings. In these modes, you've got 4 different options. They all tune the way the focusing system works, whether you're on DFD or you're on the PDAF system. Play around with these. By default, out of the box, set 1 is what you get for the photography option. And if I reset my settings, because I've been playing around with it, you'll see that your sensitivity, switching sensitivity, and moving subject prediction are all relatively neutral. You probably want to play around with some of this stuff. One, couple little minor tweaks here can make the world of difference when it comes to certain styles of photography. When I do the motorcycle shooting or photographing, I'm in set 4 on mine because I need it to be faster. I need it to be The motion prediction needs to be, tuned up because the bikes are coming at different angles, different speeds. You have all the control in there. By default, it's going to be a relatively middle of the road. Wildlife and birding is a much more intensive style of shooting for photography, whether you're using the GH6 or you're using something like the S series. Live view composite on the GH6, please. We've had a lot of requests for that one. I honestly don't know if it's going to come. Let's see here. Will the S5 Mark II and S5 Mark IIX have the capability to record to Blackmagic recorders? At this time, I don't have an update for you as far as that goes. I assume, Jake, you're referencing, will we be able to do Blackmagic Raw on those cameras? If you're just looking at being able to do ProRes out, yeah, of course, the Blackmagics work for standard ProRes. But as far as Blackmagic Raw or ProRes Raw, the only thing that we've been able to announce so far with the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark IIX is that the Atomos Ninja 5 Plus will support ProRes Raw options. So again, the Atomos Ninja 5 Plus will support ProRes Raw options. I don't know if the Ninja 5 will ever support it. That is something that's up to Atomos as far as whether or not they want to add support to it and whether or not whether or not it can be done between the two devices. But as of right now, Atomos Ninja 5 Plus will let you Blackmagic. You can do ProRes too. In fact, I have my video assist back there that I record ProRes on all the time because I like being able to do to SD cards. So, let's see here. Rhett Eastern, you're gonna make me have a meltdown. Yes. Okay. So at this point, are we seeing more of that? Okay. All right. Looks like Eastern, I've answered your question. So, and as I'm catching up, just kind of go back and listen to that answer if you're still asking for it. Where were we? Firmware request to change the manual focus chart when turning the lens to flip it left or right for near to far. I assume what you just mean is to take the guide that's on the bottom and just reverse them. Yeah, we can ask about that. See if that's something that we can add in there. I don't know if it's going to be possible, but I don't know as far as that goes. It seems like it's just a simple UI change or a UI update. Where were we? Adamant. What is the best way to expose Vlog on the S5 Mark II? You're going to get a lot of different opinions on this. The proper way to expose Vlog on the S5 Mark II is use the luminance spot meter. So if I go here, use the luminance spot meter tool. So I am going to reprogram one of my buttons here to show you where that is and what it looks like. We have a tool built in here called luminance spot meter. So if I turn this on and I move this point, let's move it here. So right now you'll see that it's saying that it's about 30%. Let me change this into manual video mode. So right now we're at 180 degree. Let me open the lens up here. 2.8. And let me use my color checker here just to show you a basic setup here. So if you're looking for ultra, proper exposure for Vlog, this is where you are going to go and set your exposure so that luminance spot meter shows 0.0 stops. So that's about as close, 0.0 stops. Technically for Vlog, this is the proper exposure. What this means is that now, as I'm going through and looking at, different areas of the image, you'll see that middle gray is set to 42 IRE. My shadowed region here, if I come up to doing this backwards is a little tough. So if I go here, I'm 7.7 stops under middle gray, and the brightest part of my image up here on the wall is over by 0.2. That technically is giving you the proper mid-tone exposure for Vlog. The way you would then fix this is that you would add supplemental lighting. That's technically the proper way to shoot for maximum dynamic range. However, many users also will take an image like this and say, okay, I know that wall can be a lot brighter. And I know that I can go up in ISO. So they would raise their ISO to where that brightest point there in the frame, and see, I can go all the way up to 51,200, and I'm still not clipping my highlights in this region. That's kind of one of the other ways that you can expose for this. You have the tools built in with Luminance Spot Meter to be able to, kind of choose where you want your exposures to be. You can shoot to protect highlights, which means that you are boosting your exposure up using that tool to where your highlights are no longer clipping, which means you're maximizing as bright of an image as you can get. So you're getting as much detail in the highlights as you can. The other benefit here when you shoot that way is that you're also lifting your shadows out of the basement, so that you're not ever really having a shadow below 3 stops underexposed. You can kind of go down to 3. Vlog is rated to go down to 8 under, but when you get down into 8 under, you're starting to get into those areas where it's such a low illuminance level that you're really, there's information there, but are you really getting detail and information out of that? So you can shift the whole thing towards the highlight region, still get your 14 plus stops of dynamic range, and then just not have to deal with as much lower noise, lower shadow area noise, if you're letting those shadows dump all the way down. So that's a really rough kind of overall recommendation I'd give you for that. Let's see here. Firmware. Okay, so there was that one. If one lens occasionally starts closing its aperture, at least according to the number on the camera display, and no other lenses do this, is that one lens destined for a service center? If one lens occasionally starts closing its aperture, at least according to the number on the camera, and no other lenses do this, it's possible that might be a service issue. It kind of depends on, is it 2 identical lenses and you're getting, one of the lenses is constantly trying to close the aperture down when the other one isn't. You have to look at kind of the overall imaging scenario, like the whole image scenario, to kind of determine, is there something in the frame that's causing the lens to want to stop down? I'd like to recommend that the next box camera have a screen to see settings, etc., like some other cinema cameras. We've definitely gotten that request in a lot. Let's see here. Where did we go here? Thank you, YouTube, for jumping the questions here. Where did we go? There we are. Okay, now that the S5 Mark II is out, now that the S5 Mark II is out, will the S5 continue getting updates? The S5 will probably still get a couple more updates. I honestly can't commit to anything in particular, but the S5 is still a current camera. We're not getting rid of it. It's going to be around for a while. So anyone that's looking for a lower cost option, the S5 Classic is definitely still going to be there for those that don't care about PDAF and just want a solid performing, hybrid camera. Red Black Films. Will the S5 Mark II X being the absolute best value in the whole hybrid market, or with the S5 Mark II X being the absolute best value in the whole hybrid market, any possibilities for a boxed version like a GS1H? I mean, we have the BS1H and we have the BGH1, so those are still the current ones. And one of the things is to remember that development for cameras like that typically takes a few years. So now that we've got the S5 Mark II out, you will see that, like, obviously, as we said, our director has come out and said that, you should see faster paced releases coming from us over the years, as we move forward. As far as what the order of those updates are, no idea. Even if I did know, I couldn't tell you. Whether or not that includes box cameras or not, couldn't tell you. But yeah, just kind of keep an eye on some of that stuff, because the box cameras have an incredibly well suited application, and we're wildly successful with them in very specific use cases. So they're awesome cameras. I typically have been using them. I use one for my overhead. I have switched to the S5 Mark II for my main setup camera here, just because I like being able... I move around a lot, so having PDAF is a nice thing. And while the box cameras have never really given me any problems doing this, just it's the newest camera. It helps me understand and work with how others are going to be using these cameras. So, JC... asked before, but I meant, can Lumix Tether apps start and shut down cameras connected? Like the BGH1, the GH6. Currently, the app can only start and stop recording on each camera. The app can wake the cameras, but it can't put them... It can put them to sleep or turn them off, and it can wake them, but it has to be done over Bluetooth. So it can... but you're actually talking about Lumix Tether, so not the Sync app. Lumix Tether for the box cameras can wake and sleep the cameras, not the GH6. The BGH1 and the BS1H, when you open up the camera option on the screen, and actually, I might be able to show this to you. I might be able to. Let me see. I just have to see if I have my Tether stuff updated. Yes, I do. So, let's go to... I just have Photoshop open here because in case someone wanted to look at that. But what you would do, JC, is click on camera list. And if I moved the camera list over here, you'll see a little option here. It's a little lit camera icon. When you click on this, that puts that camera to sleep. And then when you click on it again, it'll wake that camera up. So you do have the option to sleep and wake the cameras that are attached. Right now, I believe it is limited to just the box cameras because those can be powered over Ethernet, and usually that's how a lot of people are doing it. I do not believe the GH6 or the other cameras can do that. G100 can shoot Vlog, but in 8-bit. Can this be graded without the image falling apart? And if so, what conversion LUT should be used? The G100, while yes, it does shoot Vlog L, it is in 8-bit. You can, of course, grade 8-bit Vlog footage. However, you do have to be relatively careful with how far you push the colors in the grade. Simple 709 conversions can work, but the biggest thing that you need to kind of really watch out for when you're grading an 8-bit piece of footage is the gradients. You don't want to stretch an image too far because you just don't have enough bits for the data to really be able to be spread across. So that's where you'll get banding. But anyone that tells you that 8-bit Vlog footage can't be graded is not... they're taking a very opinionated stance on that. Of course you can grade 8-bit footage. You just have to be a lot more careful with it, and it's not as flexible as 10-bit. Why isn't the live composite feature available for the S1? My understanding is the S1, S1R, and S1H don't have the hardware required to do it. The newer cameras like the S5 and when the S5 Mark II and the Mark II X, they'll have it. Cameras like the GH5 Mark II have it. Not every camera has everything that is required to run all of those different capabilities, and sometimes it's the resources that would be required to do that are put to another feature that camera has that some others don't. But at this point, I don't think the S1 would ever get it. You'd have to go to an S5 or an S5 Mark II. Hi, Sean. Is there any technical limitations to the 65x24 not being available in high-res mode? I'm using the markers for framing right now, but it would be nice to see that in a new update. Yes, so high-resolution shot mode is limited in what aspect ratios you can shoot in. The 65x24 does not allow you to use high-res shot mode. If you notice, it also limits some of the AF point availabilities. And a lot of that's because of the fact that it's the aspect ratio that's recorded in to do the full stitching. Our RAW files still always take the full sensor height and width when you're doing it, no matter what aspect ratio you're in. So 65x24... well, yes, it would be nice to have it in camera to do it, so you just output a 65x24 high-res shot image. Some of it is also down to the fact that it's processing the cropped version of it from the full image area of it, to get that image. It adds a lot of extra overhead to it, and it would probably add a lot of time to that compile for that image. So as of right now, it's if you do want a 65 by 24, you just shoot standard full high res, and then just apply a 65 by 24 crop in something like Lightroom or whatever software you're using. That's probably not the best answer you wanted, but that's just kind of how it works right now. I have a bizarre question. Is it possible to use the sensor IBIS axis movement to make micro changes in the focal plane? For example, for ultra macro focus stacking with manual lenses. That is a bit of... I mean, it's not really a bizarre question. I think the level of precision that would be required to do that is probably beyond what is currently doable with stabilization systems. They are very accurate, but they also require incredibly accurate gyros and like measurement data. So to do something like, kind of micro changes for focus stacking, probably not going to happen. The sensors don't move front to back. They rotate, they pitch, they yaw, and then they shift up, down, left, and right. So that's where you get all the different axes. They don't, like if this is the sensor plane, they don't move like this. If this is the lens mount, the sensor doesn't move this way. So that's why you wouldn't really have that capability. But hey, that's something to bring up. Maybe eventually that kind of hardware will eventually be able to be done. Let's see here. The creative video combined set are set to combine by default. I think almost everybody will change this if they find and understand the setting. Yes, Matt Fraser and I have both actually given our opinions to our team that by default they should be set to separate. So the more all of you kind of bring it up, the more likely we are to see changes like that happen. Alan, what I meant was that I have. Oh, okay, Alan, cool. I'm finally getting back to your question now that I'm further down in the chat list here. What I meant was that I had set the control dial to set ISO, but the next time I went back to that mode, it was reset to headphone volume. Not sure what I might have done in the meantime. Let me dig into that one, because, so for what Alan's talking about, you have the ability in the cameras to come in here, and I can go to its dial set. I think that was what you were saying, right? Dial set to ISO. So you can go to dial set and change the rear control dial from headphone, which is what it is by default, to ISO. And what you'll see is that in the menu, it's set that in program, aperture, shutter, and manual, it should be set to ISO. So now, if I rotate that rear dial, it's going to adjust my ISO. If I power cycle the camera, and then I cycle the camera back on, yeah, it's still doing it here. That's one I'm going to have to dig into a little bit, Alan. Now that I know, like, I see what it is you're looking at, I can dig into that, and we can talk about that next week on the stream. On the GH6 with the 10 to 25, 25 to 50, when you pull the manual focus ring, the focus ring control menu goes to non-linear and obviously grays. Should that not be linear? That just might be a menu naming difference, because yes, when you pull that ring out, it is linear. The difference is that the linear, non-linear menu option is not just saying linear, non-linear, because you can also go in and change the angle of degree. That's why it grays out, because when you pull the clutch back, you can't change the angle of degree for throw, because you're on a set angle that it can only work at. So, what is the base ISO on the GH6? Never found information for that. Shooting mostly in Vlog. Vlog is going to have two separate base ISOs, or native ISOs, with and without dynamic range. So dynamic range boost on your native or base ISO for the GH6 is 2000. With it off, it's 100. Let's see here. I'm trying to build a quick reference table wiki over at r/Lumix. Is there a list of cameras post G7 starting with... Stating which cameras use over subsampling or pixel to pixel in 4K and 180. I don't know if there is a published list for that. I don't know if that's something we have or would publish. But I can check and see if something exists. And if I find it, I'll let you know over on Reddit. Any chance of adding 4K UHD ProRes to the GH6 since C4K crops the top and bottom, which I generally don't want? I've asked for it. I don't know what the reasons are why we don't do UHD ProRes in the GH6. I know Matt has asked it too, so we would have to double check and kind of double check. Rhett says, it happened twice using Creative Video Combined Set. I would be on the auto and 12,800 max, and it would refuse to go over 3,200. I changed max down and back up, and I think it resolved it. Okay, that gives me a little bit more info, Rhett, to kind of dig into and see if I can recreate it on my side. If I can recreate it, I can get it over to the engineers. When I use the flash, do I have to disable exposure preview, or does the machine automatically disable it? Yeah, so if you're using exposure compensate or exposure preview, things like that, when you put the flash on the camera, it does override that, because now it's basing the exposure off what you're inputting in the camera. It's just one way that things do for how flash can work. Think of our system as more the way that the system would have worked back in the day with film cameras. It's fairly simple and straightforward. In general, obviously, like we said at the beginning, we are known very much for our videography side. Photography side, when we start getting into things like flash photography and stuff like that, it's coming. We're building more and more in with that, and we're refining as we get more and more people that are actually using our cameras for photography. I know I use our cameras for photography, and I use like the Godox flashes and their wireless trigger. And that question actually leads me into one of the things that I wanted to bring up, because I got this question actually like 2 days ago. Actually on Reddit, someone reached out to me and was asking about it, and it was with flash on the S5 Mark II, and the ability to do high-speed sync. So for those that don't know, high-speed sync is where the camera will be set to, say like 200th of a second is the flash sync speed, right? High-speed sync is where you let the camera actually shoot at a higher rate than what the shutter normally is designed to. So when we look at the camera right now, I'm in manual and I have my flash detached, and you see that my maximum shutter speed is 200th of a second. But if I want to shoot faster than that, because I want to, kind of kill the ambient light, I only want to have the aperture and the power of my flash control what actually gets lit. You used to do this where you can go into the camera and say like, hey, enable high-speed sync. But instead what you do on the flash now, I'll see if I can do this backwards here. Let's actually go this way. So now what you do is, this is the V862. This is the Olympus model. So it's designed for our system as well. There's a button here on this flash that says sync. So when you press this, you get a little icon up here that's an H with a flash next to it. That's indicating that you're in high-speed sync now. So I have that set on the flash. When I put that on my camera, you'll see that communications here, I'm at 200th of a second, but now I can bring my shutter speed all the way up to 8,000th of a second, and I can fire the flash, and I think I had that in TTL, which, TTL, so not useful. And there you go. I've got high-speed sync with it. This image is, not going to come out because it's just not good. But if I were to do this, take another shot, you see, I can do the entire frame. I'm pointing at my screen like any of you can see it. I get the full top to bottom of the image exposed. Now, obviously, this is not a good exposure, but the whole frame from top to bottom is evenly exposed, even though I'm shooting it to 8,000th of a second for that shutter speed. And you can do that with the flash. You just have to make sure that that flash has the ability to do high-speed sync. And the Godox flashes do. Flick says, in one of the previous streams, you shortly touched on Bluetooth audio. I don't think the latency is much of an issue for monitoring, so why not offer connectivity to Bluetooth headphones? You'd be surprised how the latency for Bluetooth audio is 100% a problem. We are used to looking at stuff like these. Like, these are our Technics AZ60s. Yeah. So these are Bluetooth, you know, true wireless earbuds, right? It's totally wireless. Connects into my phone and lets me, you know, actually be able to watch things like videos and stuff and have lip sync done with it. The reason it does that is because of Qualcomm and the capabilities that Bluetooth has for audio-specific devices. Cameras do not have that set of hardware. So, what that means is that you have the issue of possibly, one, running into longer delays. So, running into a longer millisecond delay. If I remember right, anything under about 100 to 200 millisecond is where it's not as perceivable to human vision and sight. Where anything over that, you are going to notice it as far as sync goes. So audio monitoring, because that can be a relatively crucial thing. One, the latency is going to be too big. The compatibility is going to be too big. And, you know, three, cameras aren't designed to have wireless Bluetooth headphones in them at this point. So it's kind of just not there at this time. It would be an interesting thing in the future, but it would take hardware to rectify. It's not something that could be firmware updated into other cameras. Let's see here. I can't find information if the GH6 has live streaming function. I know the GH5S had this function, but the GH6 too. So no, the GH5S did not have live streaming functionality. The GH6 does not either. It's the GH5 Mark II has live streaming functionality. For the GH6 SSD recording, is there any SSD added to the 3 which are capable? Yes, there are. I am so glad you actually asked that. And I can't pull the dock up for it because it's actually connected and I'm using some stuff off it. However, if you're on a GH6, I am super excited to finally be able to tell you that on the GH6, the SanDisk ProBlade SSDs, so these are their kind of modules that you can get. This is a 1 terabyte module. These were just validated with their the dock. So if you go over to the website and take a look, those SSDs have been approved. I think there was some other SD cards approved for that, but honestly, in my opinion, and full transparency, SanDisk gave these to me, but I was ready to buy them anyway. These are 100%, like, these are some of my favorite SSD drives for traveling with and working with. Because the dock just lets you slot these in and out, and then they make a dock that you can get on your desktop that you can just slide them in and out instead of cables running everywhere and all that stuff. So yes, we have updated the GH6 SSD compatibility. SanDisk ProBlade has been added to it for 1 and 2 terabyte options. Let's see here. Where do we go here? Any hopeful words for the LX100 fans? I don't know. I love the LX100 as well. If you're looking at LX100 styled cameras, there was a really cool announcement from Leica with one of their special edition Deluxe 7s, which is really cool. But as far as LX100 and LX100 Mark II, I don't really have any new information for y'all. Does the S5 support camera to cloud workflow? No. Well, any camera can support it if you're using like the Atomos Connect solution. That'd be going from the camera to the Atomos device that then has the Connect capability, and then that would let you go camera to cloud. Let's see here. What is the maximum ProRes HQ resolution possible with the S5 2X without external SSD? Heard rumors of a limit. Hope this can be answered prior to launch. Let me double check here. 2 seconds. While we're sitting here, we've got about probably another 10 minutes that I can go for today. Let's see here. We've released the info for the S5 Mark II X, the product specifications. Just remember that S5, like ProRes recording, if you look at the GH6, you have a pretty good idea of what the internal and external requirements would be for ProRes. No camera's going to do 1.9 gigabit internally to an SD card. Where is my list? I have to look through and see where this one is, because I can't seem to find my my list here at this point. External recording modes. Recording mode internally. Yeah, I'm gonna have to dig further into this one because the sheet I have right now doesn't have that information on it for me. What has better IBIS, S5 Mark II or S5 or S1H? It's going to depend. S5 Mark II, I think, has better image stabilization than the S1H. There are a lot that will argue against me on that one. I just personally like the stabilization in the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX better. What are the photo apps available for editing GH6 RAW files? Having trouble finding one. Photoshop, Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw, Capture One can do it. On One, I think, can do it. Luminaire Neo can do our RAW files. Yeah, pretty much all the major ones. If you're looking in the Adobe workflow, you have to make sure that you're on the Creative Cloud if you want native support, or you have to make sure you're using at least version 15.2, because that's what added the S5 Mark II. At least make sure you're on the newest version there, because you can use the DNG converter from Adobe, which is a standalone program. Convert everything into DNG and then be able to send it over to whatever programmer you want. Okay. Eastern, unfortunately, I answered your question. You have now been put in timeout. Again, if you spam a point more than twice, I am putting you in timeout. I'm sorry if you think it's not friendly, but don't spam my chat. Hare says, will Live View Composite be part of the upcoming S5 Mark II update? What else will be part of the update? So S5 Mark II will be getting Live View Composite. I don't have the date on when that is coming to the camera yet, but it should be. My guess is it's closer to when the Mark IIX is shipping and released. The update that we did just announce is more of a kind of mid-level update coming out. It addresses some things like burst shooting, speed and responsiveness for the viewfinder, stuff like that. Outside of that update, I believe for the when Live View Composite comes out, is also what's going to be adding the ability for RAW over HDMI, but that will be the paid side. So that's where on an S5 Mark II, you'd have to get the SFU2 upgrade to do RAW over HDMI on the basic S5 Mark II. But all of those will come a little bit later. We'll have more information on those as we get closer to the release date on those. The announcement we made for coming firmware update, that's like in the next, I think we had said like in March. That's a different firmware. That's additional to what we've ever talked about. So, let's see here. When using the XLR1 audio module, can we only record 2 channels? My GH6 always records 4 channels on my SD card from the GH6 when I don't need it. Can this be a feature added later on? We have asked our engineers to see if they can set it where you can toggle having all 4 channels recorded or shown at once versus only 2. At this point, I don't know if we're going to have any kind of update. Carlos, why is there a lag when using flash? When pressing the shutter button, there's about a half-second lag when the actual photo is taken. Can this be fixed in firmware? I don't have any lag with my flash. I got to know what flash you're using, what protocol it's using, and if you're using AFC, so I just set my S5 Mark II in AFC, and it's fine. We don't do continuous flash fire, and I'm gonna have to put a flash warning at the beginning of this video now. With the S5 Mark II, we don't support continuous flash capture when you're using the flashes, so that's not something that we have there. I honestly, I would be curious to know what flash you use, what overall system you work with there. I just don't I don't know enough information about it, but I know that with my V862, I have no lag when I shoot flash with the camera. So there's got to be something else kind of going on there. S5 2 autofocus bug. When the camera goes into sleep mode and then waking on the camera, straight into video mode, it causes the autofocus to not work and continuous AF becomes slow. I can check in on that one. That's the first I'm hearing about that. So yeah, I will check into that one, Ruckus. Can you tether shoot the S5 Mark II with an iPad for photo shoots? I mean, yes. You would do it through the Wi-Fi connection, but you can't really technically connect the camera and do a shoot that way. To where like you're controlling the camera or seeing the photos live pop up over USB, because that would be USB recording and the camera doesn't support that. But yeah, you could do it with the Lumix Sync app. Can you put RAW internally in a camera and join Nikon in the Fighting Red? Not even gonna go anywhere near that one. That's just a whole stupid situation. Where do we go? Where do we go here? Lumix S5. Is it possible to take a photo while being in video mode? Shutter button starts recording, so maybe there's mapping another button possible. No, that's something we used to do in like the early G series cameras, but in the current cameras, so like the S5, S5 Mark II, all those cameras, you would just keep recording the video, and then when you're playing the video back, you just pause it, and then you can save the frame out. That, I believe when you do it that way, that also saves all the metadata. Even in the earlier cameras that were allowing you to capture a still while you were recording, it was just doing a frame grab. It wasn't giving you a full resolution image out of it. It's giving you whatever it is that you're recording. So you can still kind of do it, but you have to just go back and playback and do it. I know it's a little different, but... multi-res photo for GH5 Mark II. I don't believe the GH5 Mark II has the stabilization hardware that's required to do the high-resolution shot mode. High-resolution shot mode requires a pretty specific capability for how precise the stabilization module can be moved. So unfortunately, I don't think that one's going to be able to be supported on the GH5 Mark II. Let's see here. Using the Godox flash from Carlos. There's a couple different flashes from Godox, Carlos, and I have to know which model you're using. Like I said, my V862, I don't have any lag with it. It's instantaneous when I go to take the picture, so I'm not 100% sure. What I could recommend in the meantime is change between AFC and go to AFS, see if there's a difference there. For your particular setup, double check, see if you're in first curtain, second curtain, check the different AF modes. Okay, so you're using the V862. Yeah, I don't know what that would be causing then, because we're using the same flash and I'm not having any delays with the flash firing on my system. So yeah, I can look to do a little bit of research on that and kind of see if I can find a setting that maybe causes a delay. But yeah, that'll take a little bit of time, and I'll double check it. Now that I'm addressing this kind of reminds me of an email that I had gotten internally, someone looking for it. I have a feeling that might be you. If that is, just let me know. You can either reach out to me at lumixlive@us.panasonic.com, and I'll do some testing, because I have the V862, I have the X1 transmitter, so I can do some testing for you there. Okay, with that, I do have to call it for today. This has been an awesome stream. Thank you all so much for all of the questions that you've asked. I know that I haven't been able to get to every single one of them. But yeah, these are fun streams. Seeing the, how many people have tuned in. Okay, yes, that was you, Carlos. Okay. I will go back through my emails and see if I can find that really quickly and kind of do some testing here. But yes, everybody, thank you all so much. We will be live again next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. I'm working out trying to get a another interview with one of another photographer, videographer out there. So hopefully I'll be able to get you some info earlier than the day of the stream that y'all see the links for it. But yeah, we'll be back next week. If y'all have any questions moving forward, if you want to reach out to us, our email address posts in the end card for this video, so feel free to reach out to us via email. We try to get back to them as fast as we can. This time of year is usually a little tough to be like really quick with responding. So if you submit something in there and you don't really get a response back right away, know that we are looking at it and we'll try to incorporate the topic or the question into a future stream. And then what else? Yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. I hope you have an awesome weekend. If you're out there and you're capturing with the cameras, make sure to tag us on social media, on Instagram. If you're someone over on TikTok, go check us out on TikTok. We've got some funny content over there. If you're just looking for things to just kind of kill the day. And then, yeah. If you think this was a good stream and you liked it, let us know. Give us a like, subscribe, share the video to people that you think may find some use or interest in what we talked about today. Yeah, otherwise, take care, everybody. Have a good weekend. Talk to you next week.